My name is Patricia, and I'm 57 years old. After 28 years of marriage to Michael, I never expected to be standing alone in an upscale Chicago restaurant, my heart pounding as my husband's words hung in the air. Worthless. He'd called me laughing at my success while our friends watched in shock. That car he'd dreamed about since college sat in our garage at home, my anniversary gift to him. But sometimes, silence speaks louder than words. If you're watching this, tell me where you're from, hit that like and subscribe button, and let me share how I finally found my voice by walking away. I grew up in a middle-class family in suburban Illinois, the first in my family to attend college. My parents worked multiple jobs to ensure I could focus on my studies rather than worrying about tuition payments. Their sacrifice instilled in me a deep appreciation for education and financial independence. I met Michael during my second year at Northwestern's business school. He was charming, ambitious, and seemed to value my intelligence. We connected over late-night study sessions and shared dreams of successful careers. What attracted me most was how he listened when I spoke about my professional aspirations. He'd nod thoughtfully and offer suggestions, treating my goals with the same respect he gave his own. After graduation, we dated for 2 years before marrying in a modest ceremony. Both sets of parents attended, though I noticed the slight disapproval from his family. Michael came from wealth, old money that had cushioned generations of his family. His mother was elegant, but rarely spoke about anything substantial in mixed company. His father, a banking executive, clearly viewed wives as decorative rather than substantive. Still, Michael seemed different, and I believed our marriage would be an equal partnership. The early years were good. I started in entry-level management at a consulting firm while Michael began climbing the ladder at a prestigious financial institution. We supported each other's career moves, celebrated small victories together, and comforted each other through professional disappointments. We decided to delay having children to focus on establishing ourselves professionally. Neither of us felt pressured about this decision initially, though his mother would occasionally make comments about biological clocks during holiday gatherings. 5 years into our marriage, we purchased our first home in an upscale Chicago suburb. The mortgage stretched our finances thin, but Michael insisted we needed to live in the right neighborhood to cultivate the right connections. I agreed, believing that strategic networking was important for both our careers. It was around this time I began noticing subtle shifts in Michael's attitude. When we'd attend dinner parties with his colleagues, he'd interrupt me mid-sentence or explain my points for me, as though I couldn't articulate them properly myself. At first, I dismissed these moments as isolated incidents, perhaps the result of too much wine or professional excitement. Michael's obsession with the Aston Martin DB5 began during college, after watching classic films. He kept a small model of it on his desk, occasionally mentioning how, someday, when he'd made it, that car would sit in our garage. I found his dream endearing and would sometimes leave automotive magazines featuring the car on his nightstand when I found them. As Michael climbed higher in the financial world, I noticed him gradually adopting mannerisms and attitudes that reminded me of his father. He began making casual remarks about women executives, as though they were a different species. When I called him on these comments, he'd laugh and say I was being too sensitive. The young man who had valued my ambition seemed to be fading, replaced by someone who viewed my career as secondary to his own. In those early years, I missed the warning signs, mistaking his growing condescension for the natural stress of two ambitious people building careers. I couldn't have known then how these small moments of disrespect would compound over time, setting the stage for much deeper disappointment. 10 years into our marriage, I was thriving at my company. My performance reviews were consistently excellent, and I was positioned for a senior management role. The promotion seemed certain until the announcement came they'd hired externally, bringing in a man with less experience but an impressive network of connections. That evening, I returned home dejected. Michael was in his study reviewing quarterly reports. When I shared the news, expecting consolation, he barely looked up from his papers. Maybe executive leadership isn't really your strength, Patricia. Not everyone's cut out for the top spots. His words stung more than the professional disappointment. What do you mean I've consistently exceeded targets for years? He sighed, finally giving me his full attention. There's more to leadership than meeting targets. There's a certain presence, a command, that some people naturally have. The implication hung between us. Some people, not me. I retreated to our bedroom, questioning not just my professional capabilities, but my husband's belief in me. Had he always seen me this way, as somehow inherently lacking around this time? Michael began spending more evenings networking with male colleagues, often excluding me from these gatherings. It's just boring shop talk, he'd say, though I knew these connections were valuable for career advancement. Through Michael, I met Richard, his new boss, and Richard's wife, Amanda. While our husbands discussed market trends and potential deals, Amanda and I formed an unexpected friendship. She was intelligent and well-read, but had surrendered her own career ambitions early in their marriage. Sometimes I wonder who I might have been, she confided during a charity gala, while our husbands worked the room. Richard needed a certain type of wife for his position. I became that person. Her words haunted me. Was I slowly being molded into a certain type of wife, as well after being passed over for promotion again? The following year, I made a decision that would alter the course of both my career and my marriage. I resigned and started my own consulting business. The timing was terrifying. Economic indicators were shaky, and the security of a regular paycheck had been comforting. Yet something in me knew this step was necessary, not just professionally, but personally. When I told Michael my plans, his reaction was immediate and dismissive. A consulting business in this economy. Do you realize the failure rate for new businesses? I've done the research and developed a solid business plan, I countered. He chuckled, pouring himself a scotch. Well, good luck with your little business then. Just don't touch our main investment accounts when it doesn't work out. His lack of faith wounded me deeply, but it also ignited a determination I hadn't felt in years. I converted our rarely used guest room into an office, invested my personal savings into basic infrastructure, and leveraged my professional network for potential clients. 3 months of rejection followed. Each no reinforced Michael's prediction of failure, though he'd stopped mentioning my business entirely, as if it were a hobby not worth discussing. Then came my first major client, a mid-sized company needing restructuring consultation. I worked 18-hour days, ensuring the project's success. When the client signed a contract for ongoing services, effectively ensuring my business's survival for the next year, I shared the news with Michael over dinner. Looks like you got lucky, he said, before changing the subject to his own work challenges. I realized then that no success of mine would ever receive genuine celebration from him. This understanding created an emotional distance I maintained, even while keeping up appearances socially. We became expert performers at dinner parties and corporate events the picture of a successful modern couple. For Michael's 40th birthday, I organized an elaborate celebration at his favorite restaurant. Colleagues, friends, and family gathered to honor him. During his speech, after thanking various mentors and friends, he casually remarked, "And thanks to Patricia for organizing tonight. Planning parties is definitely more her speed than corporate strategy." The room laughed politely, while I maintained my smile, swallowing yet another public diminishment. Later, several female guests approached me separately, squeezing my hand in silent support. They recognized what had happened, even if their husbands didn't. That night marked a turning point in how I viewed our relationship. The hurt remained, but something else emerged alongside it: clarity. I began seeing our interactions not as isolated disappointments, but as part of a pattern, one I had been trained over years to accept. 5 years later, the economic landscape had shifted dramatically. The financial crisis affected many businesses, but my consultancy had diversified enough to weather the storm. In fact, companies seeking efficiency and restructuring during difficult times meant my services were in high demand. Michael's career took a different trajectory. His firm faced investigations for questionable practices, and while he wasn't directly implicated, his department came under scrutiny. The pressure showed in his increasingly erratic behavior and financial decisions. While I maintained careful savings habits, Michael's spending accelerated. He bought an expensive sports car that stretched our budget, took golf trips with clients that seemed excessive, even for business development, and came home with luxury purchases he'd hide in his closet before I could see the bags. One afternoon, while searching for tax documents in his desk, I discovered credit card statements he'd hidden. The balances were staggering, with minimum payments barely covering the interest charges. When confronted, he turned the situation around with remarkable skill. "You're overreacting. Everyone carries some debt. Besides, if your business were doing better, I wouldn't have to maintain appearances for both of us." "My business is doing fine," I countered. "And these expenses aren't about appearances. They're about your gambling." His face hardened. "Don't be ridiculous. Those casino charges were entertaining clients. You've become so paranoid about money since starting your little venture." That night, I opened separate bank accounts and moved my business profits into them. When Michael discovered this action, weeks later, the argument that followed was explosive. "You don't trust me, after everything I've done to support you." "Support me? You've belittled my business since day one." His voice dropped dangerously. "Because it's embarrassing watching you play entrepreneur while real business people handle serious money. You should be grateful I allow it at all." The word "allow" hung between us, revealing how he truly viewed our relationship. Sandra, my executive assistant, who had been with me since the business launched, witnessed Michael's behavior firsthand when he would call or visit the office. After one particularly dismissive phone call, she hesitantly approached my desk. "Mrs. Davis, forgive me if I'm overstepping, but my sister was married to someone who spoke to her that way. It doesn't get better." I thanked her for her concern, but changed the subject. Even as my personal life fractured, my professional reputation couldn't afford the complication of domestic troubles becoming office knowledge. As my business continued growing, despite economic headwinds, Michael's resentment grew proportionally. When I won a prestigious industry award, he claimed a work emergency prevented his attendance at the ceremony. I accepted the award alone, surrounded by peers, but feeling the conspicuous absence of spousal support that other winners enjoyed. Later that evening, a colleague's Instagram post revealed the truth. Michael had been at a sports bar with friends during the ceremony, no emergency in sight. When confronted, he shrugged it off as miscommunication about the event's importance. Our lives continued diverging. My carefully built success contrasted sharply with Michael's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain his position and lifestyle. He began sabotaging my professional commitments in subtle ways, forgetting to tell me about schedule changes to events where we were both expected, planning trips that conflicted with my important meetings, or creating household emergencies when I had major presentations. Through it all, I maintained external composure. My clients saw a confident, composed consultant. My friends saw a supportive wife managing a successful business. Only in private moments did the emotional turmoil surface. Quiet tears in the shower, sleepless nights, reviewing both balance sheets and life choices, and the growing realization that my marriage had become a facade covering mutual resentment. As our 28th anniversary approached, I closed the biggest deal of my career, a $50 million contract to oversee the restructuring of a major corporation's North American operations. The 2-year project would include a substantial initial bonus payment, effectively doubling my annual income overnight. The timing seemed perfect. For years, I'd listened to Michael reminisce about that Aston Martin DB5, his dream car, since college days. Despite our strained relationship, some part of me still wanted to make a grand gesture, perhaps hoping it might rekindle something of the mutual respect we once shared. Through a specialized broker, I located the exact model and year Michael had always described, a 1964 Aston Martin DB5 in silver birch with the original leather interior. The price was astronomical, but the bonus would cover it without touching our savings. After extensive paperwork and a wire transfer that made my heart race, the car was scheduled for delivery the morning of our anniversary. I arranged for a special dinner that evening at Everest, the same restaurant where Michael had proposed 29 years earlier. I invited a small group of our oldest friends and some newer colleagues who knew us as a couple. In my mind, the evening would unfold perfectly. A lovely dinner, warm speeches, and then we would return home, where I would lead Michael to the garage for his surprise. The morning of our anniversary, the car arrived as scheduled. I watched with childlike excitement as it was carefully unloaded and parked in our garage. The delivery man handed me the keys and paperwork, which I placed in a simple blue envelope with Michael's name. Michael had left early for a breakfast meeting, so he hadn't seen the delivery. My anticipation built throughout the day as I imagined his reaction. Would this gesture finally break through the walls that had grown between us? Would he remember the young man who had shared dreams with his equally ambitious girlfriend that evening? I dressed carefully in a navy blue dress Michael had once complimented. When he arrived home to change before dinner, he barely glanced at me before heading upstairs. No anniversary wishes, no acknowledgement of the day's significance. At the restaurant, our guests had already gathered. Michael immediately headed for the bar, returning with a double scotch that he drank quickly before ordering another. By the time we were seated, he was louder than usual, his gestures more expansive. The meal progressed through multiple courses, each paired with wine I barely touched. Michael, however, continued drinking steadily. When dessert was served, the traditional time for anniversary toasts began. Our friends offered kind words about our partnership longevity and success. Some shared humorous anecdotes from our earlier days. Then, Michael stood glass in hand. 28 years. He began his words slightly slurred. 28 years of watching Patricia pursue her ambitions. The table grew quiet at his tone. You know, when I married her, I thought I was getting a wife. He chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. Instead, I got a business partner who's too busy for proper wifely duties. Shocked glances passed between our guests. One friend tried to interject with a lighter comment, but Michael continued. She thinks I don't notice how she prioritizes her clients over me, her precious business consuming everything while our home life suffers. He took another drink. What good is a successful wife who fails at being a wife? All that money she's so proud of earning, and she's worthless where it actually matters. The word worthless echoed in the sudden silence. I felt a curious detachment, as though observing the scene from outside my body. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment of undermining over nearly 3 decades crystallized in that moment. In that crystallization came clarity. I remembered the young woman who had graduated with honors, whose professors had marked for success. I remembered how gradually, almost imperceptibly, I had learned to dim my light in Michael's presence. I remembered each time I'd swallowed my pride, when he took credit for my ideas, each time I'd hidden my hurt, when he minimized my achievements. And I knew I was done. I smiled. Not the tight social smile I'd perfected over years of enduring such moments, but a genuine smile of someone who has finally solved a difficult puzzle. Without a word, I stood, placed my napkin beside my plate, and walked out of the restaurant. Behind me, I heard confused murmurs and Michael's voice rising indignantly. But for the first time in years, his opinion no longer mattered. Each step toward the door felt like walking into a new life, one where I was neither diminished nor defined by his assessment of my worth. In my car, I sat for several minutes, hands steady on the steering wheel, though I hadn't started the engine. Tears came not of sadness, but of relief. The weight of pretense I'd carried for so long suddenly lifted, leaving me lightheaded with newfound freedom. I drove home, alone, the radio off, allowing myself to fully experience the emotions washing through me. Anger gave way to sadness, which transformed into a strange exhilaration. By the time I pulled into our driveway, a sense of calm purpose had settled over me. Inside the garage, the silver Aston Martin gleamed under the fluorescent lights. I ran my hand along its perfect finish, appreciating its beauty, while recognizing it now symbolized something entirely different than I'd intended that morning. In the kitchen, I placed the blue envelope containing the car keys and ownership papers on the granite countertop, where Michael would easily see it. After a moment's thought, I added a simple note. You always said this car was your dream. Dreams are important. I'm leaving to pursue mine. Upstairs, I packed methodically. Clothes for a week, essential toiletries, important documents, and a few sentimental items that were truly mine. No photographs of Michael, no mementos of our vacations or anniversaries. I was not packing for a temporary absence, but preparing for a clean break. I called Sandra, apologizing for the late hour. Without revealing everything, I explained. I needed temporary accommodation. My guest house is yours for as long as you need it, she offered without hesitation. Should I come get you? No, I can drive myself. Thank you, Sandra. I'll explain everything soon. I left before Michael returned, driving through familiar neighborhoods that suddenly looked different. as though I was seeing them through new eyes. Sandra was waiting in her driveway. When I arrived, her expression concerned but not pitying. She helped carry my bags to the small guest house behind her main residence, tactfully asking no questions. "There's food in the refrigerator, fresh towels in the bathroom. We'll talk when you're ready," she said before leaving me alone. That first night away from the home I'd shared with Michael for decades was a strange mixture of grief and liberation. I lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, a neighbor's dog barking wind chimes on Sandra's porch, distant traffic, all underlining the reality of my decision. My phone vibrated repeatedly with messages and calls from Michael. The progression was predictable confusion, anger, accusation, and finally, when I didn't respond, concern tinged with manipulation. "Where are you? How dare you embarrass me like that? This childish behavior proves everything I said. If you're trying to punish me, it's working. Come home so we can talk like adults. Patricia, I'm worried about you. Please just let me know you're safe. I didn't mean what I said. You know how I get when I drink too much." I read each message but maintained my silence. For once, I wanted him to experience the uncertainty I had lived with for years, never knowing which Michael I would encounter from one day to the next. The following morning brought more messages, these with a different tone. He had discovered the car. "Is this a joke? There's an Aston Martin in our garage. Where did this come from? What's going on? Did you buy this with what money? Call me immediately. We need to discuss this financial decision." He still didn't understand. The car wasn't about money. It was about value. Specifically, how he valued me versus how I had finally learned to value myself. Later that day, I met with attorney Judith Levinson, a woman whose reputation for handling high-profile divorces with discretion had made her the top recommendation from my professional network. "I want this handled fairly," I told her after explaining the situation. "I'm not looking to punish him financially. I just need a clean break." She studied me with shrewd eyes. "Most clients come in here breathing fire, especially after incidents like the one you described. Your calmness is unusual. I wasted enough emotional energy on this relationship. I won't waste more on its ending." She nodded approvingly. "That attitude will serve you well. Still, I should warn you. When reality sets in for him, things may get ugly." Her prediction proved accurate sooner than expected. That afternoon, Michael showed up at my office, demanding to speak with me. My receptionist forewarned about the situation called security, while simultaneously alerting me to his presence. I met him in the reception area, maintaining professional composure despite his agitation. "You can't just leave like this," he hissed, aware of watching eyes. "What about our anniversary dinner? What about the car? What game are you playing?" "No game, Michael, and this isn't the place for this conversation. Please contact my attorney." I handed him Judith's business card. "Attorney, you're not serious." His face flushed with anger and disbelief. "Over one comment at dinner." It wasn't one comment. It was 28 years of comments. I kept my voice low, steady. "Now please leave before security arrives and makes this more embarrassing for both of us." He glanced around, noticing my employees pretending not to watch while the security guard approached from the elevator. With a final look of incredulity, he left. That night, I reviewed the schedule for my long-planned business trip to London. There had been a moment when I considered canceling it, thinking a separation should mean staying close to handle the fallout. Then, I realized that was old thinking, prioritizing the relationship's needs over my own professional responsibilities and personal well-being. I would go to London as planned. The distance would give me perspective, and the work would keep me grounded in the identity I had built, despite Michael's persistent undermining. For the first time in decades, I felt the exhilarating freedom of making decisions without calculating their impact on someone else's ego or convenience. 1 month after leaving Michael, I signed the lease on a downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Millennium Park. The space was entirely mine. No compromises on decor, no consideration for anyone else's preferences. I chose sleek, modern furnishings in colors Michael had always vetoed as too bold for our shared home. Michael's attempts at reconciliation evolved with predictable strategy. First came the flowers delivered to my office. Arrangements so large they were clearly meant to impress my staff rather than please me. These were followed by expensive gifts left with my doorman, jewelry designer handbags, items that reflected his taste rather than mine. When material gestures failed to earn a response, he switched to promises therapy counseling, a fresh start, even moving to a new city if that's what I wanted. Each message I redirected to Judith with simple instructions. All communication must go through proper legal channels. Through my business networks, I learned Michael's financial situation was more precarious than I'd realized. The investigation into his firm had intensified, and while he wasn't being criminally charged, his professional reputation had suffered. Several risky investments he'd made without my knowledge were underperforming, and the lavish lifestyle he'd maintained increasingly appeared to have been financed through mounting debt. Meanwhile, my consultancy continued thriving. I brought on 2 new senior consultants to handle the expanding client list and moved the office to a larger space in a prestigious building. The professional respect I'd earned over years of consistent results insulated me from any fallout from my personal situation. My support network expanded in unexpected ways. Sandra, always professional during work hours, became a true friend outside the office. Amanda, who had finally separated from Richard after 20 years of increasing unhappiness, reached out to share resources that had helped her transition to independence. I began seeing a therapist specializing in emotional abuse recovery. Dr. Winters helped me identify patterns I hadn't recognized, how I'd internalized Michael's criticisms until they became my own internal voice, how I'd developed hypervigilance around his moods, constantly adjusting my behavior to avoid triggering his disapproval. What you're describing is a common response to long-term emotional undermining, she explained during one session. You became so focused on managing his reactions that you lost sight of your own authentic responses. Thanksgiving arrived, my first major holiday alone. Rather than accept pitying invitations or sit in solitude, I organized a chosen family gathering at my condo for others in transition, Sandra and her teenage son, Amanda, 2 divorced colleagues, and my cousin, who had recently moved to Chicago. We cooked together, shared stories, and created new traditions, free from the tension that had characterized holidays with Michael. Michael's tactics shifted again when he realized I was proceeding with the divorce, regardless of his efforts. He began attempting to damage my professional reputation, insinuating to mutual contacts that my business success came through cutting ethical corners or that I was emotionally unstable. These efforts failed spectacularly. The relationships I'd built over decades were founded on demonstrated integrity and consistent results. Several colleagues directly informed me of his attempts, expressing their disgust at his behavior. The legal negotiations revealed more financial deceptions. Michael had hidden significant debt diverted funds to private accounts and made investments in his name, alone, using what should have been joint assets. Despite Judith's encouragement to claim my fair share aggressively, I maintained my position of seeking equitable rather than punitive division. He takes financial pride most seriously, I explained when she questioned my restraint. Knowing I could have taken more, but chose not to, will bother him far longer than any dollar amount. 4 months into our separation, we met face-to-face at Judith's office to review settlement terms. Michael arrived with his own attorney, a young man with an aggressive reputation. The contrast between them was striking. Michael looked older, haggard, even while I felt more energized and focused than I had in years. When his attorney began aggressively questioning the valuation of my business, suggesting it was worth far more than reported, Michael finally showed his true colors. "She's been planning this for years," he interrupted. "Building her business with contacts I provided, squirreling away money while I handled our main expenses. This whole victim act is just another calculation." I remained silent, letting his outburst hang in the air. The lawyers exchanged glances. His attorney cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess," Judith suggested. In the hallway, she touched my arm lightly. "That display just strengthened our position considerably. His lawyer knows it too." I nodded, feeling oddly detached from the proceedings. The Michael in that conference room was a stranger to me now. His power to hurt or influence me had evaporated like morning mist. As winter turned to spring, I reconnected with old friends Michael had gradually isolated me from over the years. College roommates, former colleagues, even my first boss, who had always believed in my potential. People whose relationships with me had been casualties of Michael's subtle campaign to keep me dependent on his validation alone. I rediscovered interests and hobbies long abandoned as wastes of time, according to Michael's assessment. I joined a book club, focusing on international literature, took weekend painting workshops, and enrolled in conversational French classes in preparation for a solo trip to Paris I planned for the summer. My first international business trip as a single woman brought unexpected joy. Freed from checking in with Michael or managing his resentment over my absence, I extended my stay in Barcelona after the conference, allowing myself to wander its streets, dine alone at lovely restaurants, and sit in cafes, watching the world without any schedule or obligation. In therapy, I continued recognizing patterns of emotional abuse I'd normalized over decades. Dr. Winters helped me understand how Michael's behavior followed classic patterns: initial love bombing, followed by gradual devaluation, intermittent reinforcement that kept me hoping for approval, gaslighting that made me question my perceptions, and isolation that limited outside perspectives. The structure of abuse is remarkably consistent across relationships, she explained. But recognition is complicated by its gradual implementation. It's the proverbial frog in slowly heating water. When Michael and I finalized the division of assets, I made a decision that surprised both our attorneys. I offered to sell him my share of our house at slightly below market value, knowing he wanted to keep it as a symbol of success. What I didn't tell him was that the difference between fair market value and my selling price almost exactly matched what I'd paid for the Aston Martin he'd been forced to sell to afford buying me out of the property. That money I donated to establish a scholarship program for women entrepreneurs leaving difficult relationships. The first recipient was a talented young woman whose abusive husband had sabotaged her previous business attempts. Watching her confident presentation at the award ceremony, I saw something of my younger self, but with an earlier chance at freedom than I had given myself. 2 years after walking out of that anniversary dinner, my divorce from Michael was finally complete. The legal proceedings had been complicated by his attempts to claim part ownership of my business and his continued financial maneuvering. But ultimately, the settlement reflected the reality I had built my success, despite, rather than because of our marriage. My consultancy had expanded to international markets, with new offices in London and Singapore, managed by carefully selected partners who shared my business philosophy. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies and promising startups alike, all attracted by our reputation for ethical practices and demonstrable results. I moved the Chicago headquarters to a penthouse office space I designed personally. Walls of windows, bringing in natural light, comfortable meeting areas, encouraging collaboration, and art from local artists, adding warmth and character. My office featured no mahogany or leather, none of the stuffy, traditional elements Michael had insisted projected proper professionalism. Instead, it reflected my actual values: creativity, transparency, and authentic communication. Beyond business, I found deeper fulfillment in mentoring young businesswomen, particularly those leaving difficult relationships. Through the scholarship program I'd established, I met quarterly with recipients offering not just financial support, but practical guidance on establishing financial independence and rebuilding professional confidence after years of undermining. At an industry conference in New York, I encountered Michael unexpectedly. He was on a panel discussing market recovery strategies, though his firm's reputation had never fully rebounded from the earlier scandal. When our eyes met across the reception hall afterward, I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, no residual affection. He had become simply someone I used to know. He approached cautiously, looking older and somehow diminished despite his expensive suit. "You look well, Patricia." "Thank you." "How have you been, Michael?" A surface conversation followed the kind strangers might have while waiting for an elevator. He mentioned traveling more, consulting independently since leaving his firm. I noticed he wore no wedding ring, though I hadn't kept track of whether he was dating anyone. As our brief exchange concluded, he hesitated, then added, "I think about that night sometimes." What I said. I was wrong, and not just because I was drinking. I studied him, wondering if this belated acknowledgement was meant to elicit forgiveness or reconciliation. "We all make choices, Michael. I'm at peace with mine." He nodded slowly. "The house feels empty, too big for one person. Perhaps it's time for something new then." I kept my tone gentle but firm, closing the door on any implied invitation. As I walked away, I felt a moment of compassion for him. Not because I regretted my decision, but because I recognized how his own limitations had cost him what could have been a genuinely supportive partnership. His need to diminish me had ultimately diminished his own life far more profoundly. Back in my hotel room that evening, I reflected on the years I'd spent trying to earn approval from someone incapable of giving it. The energy I'd invested in managing Michael's ego might have launched a second business, written a book, or simply allowed more joy into my daily existence. Yet, I couldn't categorize those years as entirely wasted. They had shaped my resilience, refined my values, and ultimately taught me to recognize my own worth, independent of external validation. Without experiencing that relationship, I might never have developed the depth of understanding I now brought to my mentoring work. Sandra, now a full partner in the expanded business, often remarked on the transformation she'd witnessed. "You literally stand taller now," she observed during our weekly strategy lunch. "When you walk into client meetings, there's no hesitation, no looking for permission to take up space." My holiday traditions evolved with my chosen family of friends. We rotated hosting duties, shared cooking responsibilities, and created rituals meaningful to our actual lives, rather than following prescribed social expectations. These gatherings hummed with authentic connection laughter that didn't mask tension, and conversations that never required careful navigation around sensitive egos. Therapy continued less frequently, but still valuably. Dr. Winters helped me process lingering anger, not directed at Michael, but at myself for staying so long. Self-forgiveness is often the final and most difficult step, she noted when I expressed this frustration. Remember that you made the best decisions you could with the information and conditioning you had at each point. The important thing is that when you finally saw clearly, you acted decisively. Forgiveness became a personal practice, not for Michael's benefit, but for my own freedom. I forgave myself for the compromises, the silence, the years of dimming my light. I forgave the younger woman who believed she could earn love through achievement or sacrifice. That forgiveness allowed me to move forward, unburdened by resentment or regret. The Aston Martin, which had briefly symbolized both my attempt at connection and my financial independence, now represented something different in my memory: the danger of valuing someone else's dreams above my own authentic needs. I had purchased that car, hoping to finally earn the approval and appreciation Michael had withheld, not recognizing that nothing external could ever fill that particular void. As I approached that 60, I set new goals, reflecting my actual desires, rather than responses to others' expectations. I planned extended travel between business commitments, not rushed sightseeing, but slow immersion in places that intrigued me. I established a foundation supporting women's entrepreneurship in developing economies. I began collecting notes for a potential book sharing business insights gained through both professional success and personal challenge. The unexpected gift of starting over in my late 50s taught me that renewal remains possible at any age. The narratives suggesting relationship patterns become fixed or opportunities diminish with years proved entirely false in my experience. If anything, the clarity and confidence I'd gained through life experience made this chapter richer than earlier ones where I'd still been seeking external validation. The wisdom I share most often with younger women facing similar crossroads is about recognizing subtle disrespect before it becomes overt abuse. The small moments, interrupted sentences, diminished achievements, joking, put-downs, create the foundation for larger betrayals. By the time someone calls you worthless at your anniversary dinner, they've likely been communicating that message in smaller ways for years. I sometimes wonder if Michael ever truly understood what happened that night, how his public humiliation didn't create my decision, but merely revealed one I'd unconsciously been preparing to make for years. In calling me worthless, he had finally shown me exactly what I was worth to him, clarifying the fundamental imbalance in how we valued each other. The most valuable thing I ever purchased wasn't that car, it was my freedom, and that's something no one can ever take away from me again. Have you ever stayed in a relationship where you were undervalued or taken that brave step to walk away? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of finding strength after betrayal. Remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the courage to choose yourself when necessary.